Mother and son vanished without a trace in the vast Adirondack wilderness, leaving behind nothing but questions and heartbreak. Their mysterious disappearance baffled authorities for 2 long years until a hunter's curious dog unearthed something that would finally break the case wide open. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel and comment where you're watching from. The golden light of early autumn filtered through the pines as Mary Johnson steered her sedan down the winding gravel road. The 38-year-old teacher gripped the wheel tightly, her wedding ring conspicuously absent after finalizing her separation just 3 weeks prior. In the rearview mirror, she caught glimpses of Ethan's face pressed against the window, his 7-year-old eyes wide with wonder at the wilderness surrounding them. "Almost there, sweetie," she called back, forcing cheerfulness into her voice. The cabin appeared around the bend, weathered cedar siding, a wraparound porch, and Deadwater Lake stretching beyond like a sheet of glass. It wasn't fancy, but it was exactly what they needed: isolation, quiet, and distance from the whispers that had followed them since the separation. Ethan bounded from the car the moment it stopped, his sneakers crunching on fallen leaves. "Mom, can I go see the water?" His voice carried that innocent excitement that made Mary's heart ache with protectiveness. "Let's unpack first," she replied, though she couldn't resist his pleading expression for long. 20 minutes later, they stood at the shoreline, Ethan's small hand in hers. The Adirondack Mountains reflected perfectly in the still water, creating a mirror world that seemed just as real as their own. Mary watched as her son collected flat stones, his technique improving with each throw. 5 skips, 6, 7. His laughter echoed across the water, a sound she hadn't heard enough since the divorce proceedings began. She captured the moment on her smartphone. Ethan mid-throw, sunlight catching his dark hair, his smile wider than it had been in months. "Jennifer will love this," she murmured, sending the photo to her older sister with a quick message. "Made it. The place is perfect." Ethan already in love with the lake. As dusk settled, they roasted marshmallows in the cabin's stone fireplace. Mary felt something like peace settling over her, until she stepped onto the porch for fresh air. The forest had changed with nightfall. The silence felt deliberate, watchful. A chill that had nothing to do with the temperature crawled up her spine. Later, while Ethan slept soundly in the loft bed, she opened her leather-bound journal and wrote by lamplight. Her pen moved quickly, anxiety bleeding through her usually neat handwriting. "There's something about this place. I can feel it watching us. Not just the normal sensation of being in the wilderness, but something—" She paused, listening to a sound that might have been wind through branches or something else entirely. By sunrise, the cabin stood empty. Ethan's stuffed dinosaur remained on his pillow. Mary's journal lay open on the kitchen table, the sentence unfinished. 2 coffee mugs sat on the counter, one half empty, one untouched. No signs of struggle, no forced entry, just absence where life had been, and the forest keeping its secrets. For 2 years, whispers about Deadwater Lake grew louder in the small towns dotting upstate New York. What began as hushed conversations in local diners soon evolved into full-blown folklore. Each retelling added new details, transforming the disappearance of Mary and Ethan Johnson into something more sinister than a simple missing persons case. "The forest has its own justice," old-timer Pete would say at the Lakeview Tavern, nursing his 3rd beer of the evening. "Them woods don't forget trespassers." Others nodded in agreement, adding their own theories about the land that simply forgot how to let people go. Some claimed to have heard a child's laughter near the abandoned cabin, while others swore they'd seen a woman's silhouette standing motionless among the trees at dusk. Detective Robert Smith watched these stories spread with growing frustration. At 58, with retirement looming just months away, the case had become his personal obsession. Each morning, he would arrive at the station early, pull out the Warren Johnson file, and stare at the evidence that never seemed to add up. No signs of struggle, no break-in, not even footprints leading away from the cabin. just emptiness where two lives should have been. The detective kept a faded photograph of Mary and Ethan tucked inside his wallet, the one from their arrival day, with the boy skipping rocks across the lake's surface, his mother smiling behind him. Sometimes, during his darkest moments, he would pull it out, studying their faces as if they might suddenly reveal where they had gone. "You're killing yourself over this one, Rob," his captain had warned last week. "Some cases just don't get solved." But Smith couldn't let go. He'd interviewed Jennifer Johnson 7 times, combed the cabin for evidence until he knew every creaking floorboard, and read Mary's journal entries so often he could recite them from memory. That final, incomplete sentence haunted him most. "I think someone is what? Watching? Following?" The veteran lawman had worked homicides, kidnappings, and disappearances throughout his 30-year career, but nothing had ever felt like this. A case with edges that seemed to blur into something he couldn't quite grasp. At night, alone in his apartment, Smith would spread maps of the Adirondacks across his kitchen table, tracing possible escape routes, marking search areas, and wondering how 2 people could simply vanish without leaving a single trace behind. The forest kept its secrets well, and the detective couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that something in those woods was watching him back. The mist hung low over Deadwater Lake that October morning, turning the world into watercolor smudges of gray and green. Callie, a shaggy bloodhound with soulful eyes and a nose that had found 3 missing hikers last season, trotted ahead of her owner, Marcus, who'd volunteered his tracking dog to help with a routine training exercise in the Adirondacks. Detective Robert Smith watched from a distance, his breath forming clouds in the crisp air. He hadn't expected much. These training days rarely yielded anything but wet boots and disappointment. 2 years had passed since Mary and Ethan Johnson vanished without a trace, and the case had grown cold as the lake waters in winter. "She's got something," Marcus called out, his voice cutting through the silence as Callie suddenly changed direction, her demeanor shifting from casual exploration to intense focus. The bloodhound veered sharply off the main trail, her nose pressed to the ground, tail rigid with purpose. The detective followed, his knees protesting as he navigated the uneven terrain. The dog moved with single-minded determination toward a gnarled cedar that stood sentinel at the lake's edge, its roots partially exposed by years of water erosion. "Callie, heel," Marcus commanded, but the animal ignored him, something she never did. Instead, she began digging frantically, her paws sending dirt and pine needles flying in all directions. Smith felt the hair on his neck rise as he approached. Something about the tree's twisted form seemed almost deliberate, as if it had grown to mark this exact spot. The search party gathered around, their conversations falling to whispers as Callie's digging grew more urgent. "Jesus Christ," breathed one of the park rangers as something blue emerged from the disturbed earth. It was a child's jacket, small, blue, and impossibly clean for something that had been buried. No dirt stained the fabric. No moisture had penetrated it. The detective's heart stuttered in his chest. He recognized it instantly from the missing persons file. The same jacket Ethan Johnson wore in the last photo his mother sent before they vanished. With gloved hands, Smith carefully lifted the garment. It had been wrapped around something with deliberate care, not hastily discarded or lost. Inside was a bundle of papers bound with red twine, the knot complex and unfamiliar. "Call it in," he instructed, his voice steadier than his hands. "And get me an evidence bag." As the team secured the scene, the detective couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't finding evidence. They were being given it. Callie sat beside the hole she'd dug, watching him with eyes that seemed too knowing for a dog, while the cedar branches above them swayed without wind. Detective Robert Smith carefully unfolded the bundle on the weathered table inside the park ranger station. His calloused fingers trembled slightly as he unwrapped the twine. The room fell silent as the contents were revealed. a hand-drawn map unlike anything in the official records. Its lines curved and looped into territories that seemed to exist beyond the boundaries of conventional cartography, areas completely missing from any Park Service documentation. "This doesn't make sense," the detective muttered, tracing the strange pathways with his index finger. "These trails don't exist on any official map." Jonah Brown leaned forward, his weathered face creased with concern. "Some of these markings, they match old Algonquin symbols for passages between worlds," the park historian whispered. Beneath the map lay a torn photograph that sent chills down everyone's spine. It showed Mary Johnson, but somehow different. Her face appeared older, more drawn than she should have looked after only 2 years. Her eyes held shadows of something unspoken, something that had aged her beyond her 38 years. The timestamp in the corner indicated it had been taken just 3 months ago. "That's impossible," one of the officers murmured. "We've searched every inch of these woods." The detective turned the photo over. On the back, written in what appeared to be charcoal, "Time moves differently here." But it was the final item that truly silenced the room. A small piece of notebook paper covered in childish handwriting. The blue crayon strokes trembled across the page, the letters uneven but unmistakably formed by a young hand. Ethan's handwriting. "We're not lost," Robert read aloud, his voice barely audible. "The woods just forgot how to let us go." The small group exchanged uneasy glances. Outside, the wind picked up suddenly, branches scraping against the station windows like fingernails. The forest seemed to press closer, as if listening to their discovery. Callie, the bloodhound who had found the jacket, whined softly from her spot under the table, her ears perked forward. "What does it mean?" asked the young officer who had joined the search party that morning. The detective carefully placed the items back into the protective evidence bag. "It means they might still be alive," he said, though uncertainty clouded his voice. "And it means we're dealing with something," he hesitated, "something I can't explain." As they prepared to notify Jennifer Johnson about their findings, the forest outside seemed to hold its breath. The map's strange contours hinted at paths unseen, at a wilderness that didn't behave according to natural laws. And somewhere within those impossible boundaries, a mother and son waited. Not lost, but somewhere the woods had decided to keep them. The call came at 3 in the morning, jolting Jennifer Johnson from a restless sleep. Detective Robert Smith's voice, gravelly with exhaustion, delivered the news she'd both longed for and dreaded. "We found something, Ethan's jacket." Within hours, Jennifer was driving north through the misty Adirondack foothills, her knuckles white against the steering wheel. The guilt that had shadowed her for 2 years intensified with each mile. She should have visited more often, should have noticed Mary's growing isolation after the separation, should have insisted they stay with her instead of retreating to that remote cabin. When she arrived at the makeshift command center, a weathered park ranger station with peeling paint, Detective Smith was waiting. The years hadn't been kind to him. New lines etched his face, and the case files spread across the table looked as worn as he did. "I kept searching," he said simply, sliding a clear evidence bag across the table. Jennifer's hands trembled as she lifted the small blue jacket. Despite being buried, it remained eerily preserved, as if time had somehow bent around it. She pressed the fabric to her face, desperately seeking some lingering trace of Ethan. The scent of the apple juice he always spilled, or the pine sap he collected in his pockets. But there was only earth and something else, something sharp and unfamiliar. "The papers inside," Detective Smith continued, gesturing to another bag containing the bundle wrapped in red twine. "They're unusual." Jonah Brown, a tall man with silver hair and deeply tanned skin, stepped forward. The local park historian's eyes carried the weight of someone who'd seen too much of the forest's secrets. "These symbols," he said, pointing to the hand-drawn map with a weathered finger, They appear in Algonquin stories about places where the world thins. His voice dropped lower. My grandmother called them doorways. My mother disappeared looking for one when I was just a boy. Jennifer glanced between the two men. You think this is connected to other disappearances? The historian nodded slowly. The forest has patterns, cycles. My family thus tracked them for generations. He hesitated, then added, these markings match symbols my mother drew before she vanished. Outside the window, the dense woods seemed to press closer, as if listening. Jennifer felt a chill race down her spine as she studied the map's strange contours, paths that seemed to loop impossibly back on themselves, landmarks that existed on no official park guide. I need to see where you found this, she said, clutching the jacket to her chest. Detective Smith exchanged a meaningful look with Jonah. The woods are different now. Something's changed since we found the jacket. How? Jennifer asked. It's watching us back, Jonah replied simply. Jonah Brown sat at the Warren Park office desk, his weathered hands tracing the symbols on the map with a reverence that spoke of personal connection. The 67-year-old historian's eyes clouded with memories as Jennifer and Detective Smith watched in silence. My mother vanished in these woods when I was just 9, Jonah finally said, his voice barely above a whisper. It was 1957. They searched for weeks, but it was like the forest had swallowed her whole. Jennifer leaned forward, her grief momentarily overshadowed by curiosity. Did they ever find anything? Just her scarf, hanging from a tree that shouldn't have been there. The historian pointed to a particular symbol on the map. In Algonquin legend, they called this area the Folding Woods, where the land itself isn't fixed, where time bends around those it chooses. Robert Smith shifted uncomfortably in his chair. The detective had seen enough in his career to know that some mysteries defied logical explanation. But this talk of bending time made the practical part of him recoil. The elders in my family spoke of it, Jonah continued, places where the veil between worlds thins. My grandmother always warned us never to follow unfamiliar paths after rainfall. Outside, the afternoon light filtered through the windows, casting long shadows across the map. Jennifer traced her finger along the crayon-marked trail her nephew had drawn. I need to follow this, she said with quiet determination. If there's even the slightest chance Mary and Ethan are… She couldn't finish the sentence. I understand your desperation, the detective interjected, his voice gruff with concern. But some paths are better left unwalked. We don't know what we're dealing with here. Jennifer's eyes flashed with sudden anger. They're my family, Robert. What would you do? The question hung in the air between them. Smith had no answer that wouldn't sound hollow. Jonah carefully folded the map, his movements deliberate. Hope is a powerful guide, Jennifer, but it can also blind us to danger. He paused, considering his next words carefully. That said, I've spent my entire life trying to understand what happened to my mother. I won't stop you from seeking answers. The historian reached into his desk drawer and pulled out an old compass, its brass casing dulled with age. This was hers. The needle never points north in certain parts of the woods. He placed it gently in Jennifer's palm. If it starts to spin, you've found a fold. Jennifer closed her fingers around the compass, feeling its weight, both physical and symbolic. Outside, clouds gathered on the horizon, promising rain by nightfall. When do we start? She asked. The detective sighed, resignation in his eyes. First light tomorrow, he said. God help us all. Jennifer Johnson led the way through the dense undergrowth, following the faded markings on Mary's hand-drawn map. Detective Robert Smith trailed behind, his weathered face set in concentration as he pushed aside low-hanging branches. The autumn air carried a peculiar stillness that made their footsteps seem unnaturally loud. We should be close, Jonah Brown whispered, his voice barely carrying over the sound of Callie's excited panting. The bloodhound had been pulling at her leash with increasing urgency for the past half-mile. They emerged into a clearing that wasn't on any official Adirondack trail map. Jennifer gasped audibly. Before them stood a grove of birch trees, their trunks twisted into unnatural shapes, as if they had grown while dancing. The white bark was marred with carvings, dates etched deeply into the living wood. "My God," the detective murmured, approaching the nearest tree. His fingers traced the numbers, 1957. These dates go back generations. Jonah moved slowly between the trees, his 67-year-old frame suddenly appearing fragile against the ancient sentinels. "This one's from 1893, he called out, voice trembling. "And here, 2001. Jennifer felt a chill race down her spine when she found a tree marked with the year Mary and Ethan had disappeared. The forest seemed to be keeping a meticulous record of those it had claimed. Callie suddenly darted forward, breaking free from Jennifer's grip. The bloodhound made straight for the largest birch at the center of the grove. A massive tree with bark so white it seemed to glow in the dappled forest light. "She's found something," Jonah said, hurrying over as quickly as his aging legs would allow. At the base of the ancient birch, partially buried beneath years of fallen leaves, lay a rusted tin box. The detective carefully pried it open, revealing a stack of children's drawings preserved inside. Jennifer's hands shook as she lifted the first sketch, unmistakably Ethan's work. His distinctive way of drawing trees, with extra branches curling like fingers, was exactly as she remembered from the birthday cards he'd made her. "Look at this one," she whispered, holding up a crayon drawing of twisted trees bending toward a small stick figure. "And this." Another showed what appeared to be a child standing before a mirror, but the reflection was different, older somehow. The final drawing made her blood run cold. A tall, elongated figure with hollow spaces where eyes should be, standing behind a small boy. In childish handwriting at the bottom, "She whispers to me at night." Detective Smith studied the drawings with growing unease. "These aren't just a child's imagination," he said quietly. "Ethan was trying to tell us something." Jonah nodded gravely. "The lady with no eyes appears in Algonquin legends. They called her the forest's memory." Jennifer tossed in her sleep, sheets tangled around her legs as Mary's voice echoed through her dreams. "Don't follow the trail, follow what's missing from it." The words lingered as she woke, the first light of dawn filtering through the cabin windows. She sat up, heart pounding, feeling her sister's presence so strongly, it was as if Mary had been sitting at the foot of her bed. Detective Robert Smith was already awake, nursing a cup of black coffee when Jennifer emerged from her room. "Bad dreams?" he asked, noting the shadows under her eyes. "Not bad," she replied. "Mary was trying to tell me something." The detective's expression remained neutral, but Jennifer could see the skepticism behind his eyes. Despite everything they discovered, Smith still clung to rational explanations, even as those explanations grew increasingly thin. Later that morning, as they resumed their search with Jonah Brown and Callie, Jennifer felt a strange pull away from the marked trail. The bloodhound seemed to sense it too, whining softly and tugging at her leash. "Wait," Jennifer said, stopping abruptly. "Mary said not to follow the trail, but what's missing from it?" The park historian looked at her curiously. "What do you think she meant?" Jennifer closed her eyes, trying to channel her sister's thoughts. When she opened them again, she pointed to a gap between two towering pines that wasn't indicated on any map. "There." Following her instinct, she stepped off the path. The others exchanged uncertain glances before following. 20 yards in, Jennifer froze. Hanging from a low branch was a faded red jacket, child-sized, with a patched elbow and frayed cuffs. "That's," she whispered, reaching out with trembling fingers. "That's my jacket. From when I was 9. Smith frowned. "Are you certain? It could be similar." "I'm certain," Jennifer interrupted, turning the jacket inside out to reveal her name written in faded marker. "Our mother wrote this. I lost this jacket 30 years ago on a camping trip." Jonah stepped forward, his weathered face suddenly pale. He examined the collar where small geometric patterns had been carefully stitched in blue thread. "These symbols," he said, voice barely audible. My mother sewed these exact patterns into my coat when I was a boy. She said they would protect me from the forest's hunger. The revelation hung in the air between them. Callie whined again, pressing against Jennifer's leg. The past is bleeding into the present, Jonah murmured, fingers tracing the stitching. The forest doesn't just take, it remembers, it collects. Detective Smith removed his glasses, rubbing the bridge of his nose. For the first time since they'd begun this journey, genuine fear flickered across his face. We're being shown something, Jennifer said, clutching the jacket to her chest. The forest is reminding us that it knows who we are, that it's always known. The footage played on Detective Robert Smith's laptop in grainy black and white. His weathered fingers tapped nervously on the desk as he watched it for the 7th time. The wildlife camera, installed near Deadwater Lake to monitor animal movements, had captured something entirely different at 3:17 in the morning. There, he murmured, pausing the video. Right there. A small figure, unmistakably child-sized, appeared at the edge of the frame. Barefoot, wearing what looked like pajamas, it moved with deliberate steps toward the water's edge. The detective leaned closer, his breath fogging the screen. The child stepped into the lake, but created no splash, no ripple. The water accepted the small body as if it were nothing more substantial than moonlight. That's not possible, Jennifer whispered, standing behind him. Her hands trembled as she gripped the back of his chair. The detective closed his eyes, a memory surfacing from decades ago. When he was just 10 years old, playing in these very woods, he'd heard a woman's voice calling his name from between the trees. Sweet, inviting, but somehow wrong. He'd run home, never telling a soul, convinced no one would believe him. I've heard things in these woods before, he admitted, his voice uncharacteristically vulnerable. Things that shouldn't be there. Meanwhile, Jonah Brown had ventured farther along the dried creek bed that fed into Deadwater Lake during spring thaws. The historian moved slowly, his 67-year-old knees protesting with each step. Callie trotted ahead, her nose working the ground with professional precision. The bloodhound suddenly froze, hackles rising. Jonah approached cautiously, pushing aside a tangle of dead branches to reveal a flat stone half buried in the earth. Carefully, he brushed away years of accumulated soil. My God, he whispered. The stone bore a symbol he recognized immediately, a series of interlocking circles with a line bisecting them. He'd seen it only twice before, once in an Algonquin text he'd studied in his 20s, and once in his mother's journal before she vanished. When Jennifer and Detective Smith caught up to him, Jonah's face was ashen. This is a boundary marker, he explained, tracing the symbol with reverent fingers. The Algonquin called it the place where names are taken. According to legend, those who cross this boundary, they can return, but never as themselves. What does that mean? Jennifer asked, her voice barely audible. It means, Jonah said, looking up at the canopy of trees that suddenly seemed to be leaning closer, that Mary and Ethan might still be alive, but if they've crossed this boundary, they may not be the same people you're looking for anymore. The trees had begun to shed their vibrant coats as autumn surrendered to winter's first breath. Frost edged the cabin windows where Mary Johnson and Ethan had spent their final documented days. Jennifer knelt in the cold earth behind the structure, her fingers raw from digging where Callie had indicated with persistent whining. I've got something, she called, brushing dirt from a small waterproof container. Detective Robert Smith and Jonah Brown hurried over, their breath forming clouds in the crisp air. Inside lay a thumb drive. As the recordings progressed, her tone shifted from contemplative to increasingly distressed. Something's wrong with time here, Mary whispered in one file dated 3 weeks after her arrival. I've marked the calendar faithfully, but the moon cycles don't match. And Ethan, her voice broke. His cuts heal overnight, but he hasn't grown a centimeter. I think we're outside of something. I'm scared to come back in. Jennifer pressed her palm against her mouth, tears tracking silently down her face as her sister's voice continued, "Time's folding. I see reflections of people in the lake who aren't there when I turn around. Ethan says they're waiting." The final recording made Smith's weathered face pale. "If you find this, Jen, know that I made a choice. The forest offered terms. I'm still deciding." Jennifer clutched the device, replaying segments obsessively as if she might extract additional words from between the pauses. The teacher's fragmented thoughts looped in her mind, impossible to reconcile with rational explanation. That evening, as they huddled around the cabin's fireplace, Detective Smith's professional facade finally cracked. He pulled out a worn folder from his bag, spreading yellowed newspaper clippings across the table. "I've been collecting these for years," he admitted, pointing to headlines spanning decades. 1957, 1979, 2001, now 2023. Every 22 years, like clockwork. Always families, always near Deadwater Lake. Jonah nodded grimly, tracing the pattern with his finger. "My mother disappeared in 79. I was just a boy." "You never told me," Jennifer whispered. "Some truths sound too much like madness." The historian replied softly. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows like something seeking entrance. On Mary's voice memo, played one final time before they attempted sleep, her last recorded words hung in the darkness. "The woods remember what we forget." The blizzard descended without warning, transforming the Adirondack landscape into a pristine white prison. Jennifer Johnson pressed her palm against the frosted cabin window, watching snowflakes dance in the howling wind. The storm had effectively sealed them in, cutting off cell service and any hope of leaving until the weather cleared. "We might be here for days," Detective Robert Smith announced, stoking the fire with practiced efficiency. His weathered face reflected the dancing flames as he added, "At least we've got enough supplies." Jonah Brown sat hunched at the kitchen table, studying Mary's hand-drawn map. The elderly historian's fingers traced invisible patterns as he muttered about forest boundaries and ancient markers. It was Callie who alerted them first. The bloodhound's sudden barking cut through the cabin's silence. Her nose pressed against the door crack, tail rigid with excitement. "What is it, girl?" Jennifer asked, crossing the room. When they cautiously opened the door, the sight stole their breath. Despite the heavy snowfall that had blanketed everything for hours, a set of small footprints, unmistakably a child's, led away from the cabin and disappeared into the tree line. The impressions looked impossibly fresh. "That's impossible," the detective whispered, instinctively reaching for his service weapon. "These tracks would be filled in by now." Jennifer felt her heart hammering against her ribs. "Ethan," she breathed, her nephew's name hanging in the frosty air. Beside the footprints, half buried in snow, lay a folded piece of paper. Jennifer's hands trembled as she picked it up, recognizing her sister's handwriting immediately. The letter was addressed to her, dated just 2 days earlier. "This can't be," she said, voice breaking. "Mary's been gone for 2 years." Inside the cabin, they gathered around as Jennifer unfolded the water-stained paper. Mary's familiar script wavered across the page, as if written by a hand fighting exhaustion. "Jen, if you're reading this, you're close. Too close, maybe. I need you to understand, I didn't get lost. I was chosen. But if he crosses the wrong path, he won't come back the same. The forest has rules. It takes what it wants and keeps what it chooses." The letter ended abruptly, as if Mary had been interrupted mid-thought. Jonah's face had gone ashen. "The legends speak of this," he murmured. "Time doesn't flow the same way in certain parts of these woods." Detective Smith paced the small cabin, his professional skepticism visibly crumbling. "We're outsiders," he said finally, "trying to break rules we don't even understand." Jennifer clutched the letter to her chest, her gaze fixed on those impossible footprints slowly disappearing under fresh snow. The forest had delivered a message and a warning. The snow fell in thick, heavy curtains, blanketing the Adirondacks in pristine white. As January's grip tightened, Callie became increasingly agitated. The bloodhound would wake from deep sleep, whining and pawing at the cabin door until someone let her out. "She's never acted like this before," Jennifer said, watching the dog disappear into the snow for the third time that week. Detective Robert Smith pulled on his boots with a sigh. "We should follow her. Animals sense things we can't." They trudged through knee-deep snow, following Callie's determined path. The bloodhound led them to seemingly random locations. A small clearing where snow had melted in a perfect circle. A fallen oak covered in frost patterns that looked almost like writing. A collection of mossy stones arranged in what appeared to be deliberate formation. "This feels pointless," Jennifer muttered, her breath clouding before her. "She's just a dog." Jonah Brown shook his head, his weathered face creased with concern. "No, she's finding something. We just don't understand what yet." That night, huddled around the fireplace in the cabin, Jennifer spread out Mary's hand-drawn map on the floor. She marked each location Callie had led them to with a red dot. The historian leaned forward, his eyes widening as a pattern emerged. "Look," Jonah whispered, tracing the connections between the dots. "It's forming the same symbol from the stone marker, and from Ethan's drawings." Jennifer stared at the pattern, remembering her nephew's crayon sketches of bent trees and mirrored boys. The symbol resembled a tree with branches folding back into themselves, creating impossible loops. "It's not just a symbol," Jonah said, his voice dropping. "It's a map to the folds in the forest, places where our world thins and touches something else." The detective paced by the window, watching the snow fall. "You're saying these locations are what, doorways?" "More like seams," the historian replied. "Places where reality isn't quite fixed." Jennifer looked up at him. "How do you know all this?" Jonah's hands trembled as he pulled an old photograph from his wallet. A woman with kind eyes standing beside a much younger version of himself. "My mother disappeared in these woods when I was 9. Before she vanished, she told me stories about our family's connection to this land." He swallowed hard. "The stories said our bloodline was chosen by the forest's ancient guardians, that we could hear the woods speak." His voice cracked. "I've always feared that my mother didn't just disappear, she was claimed." Outside, Callie began to howl, the sound echoing through the silent forest like a summons. The fire crackled in the cabin's stone hearth, casting long shadows across Detective Robert Smith's weathered face. Outside, the Adirondack darkness pressed against the windows like a living thing. Jennifer Johnson watched as the detective's hands trembled slightly, his coffee untouched. "I've never told anyone this," Robert began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Not my wife, not my partner, nobody." He looked up, eyes haunted by something beyond the present. "When I was 10, I was playing near these same woods. It was getting dark, and I knew I should head home. But something kept me there." Jennifer leaned forward, the wooden chair creaking beneath her. "There was a woman standing between two pines," he continued. "Her face was wrong somehow. Where her eyes should have been, there was just emptiness. She called my name, my full name, even though we'd never met." The detective's voice cracked. "She said I would return someday, to help someone find their way back. Why didn't you ever mention this before?" Jennifer asked. Robert laughed bitterly. Who'd believe a detective who claims to have seen a woman with no eyes as a child? "I'd have been removed from the case." He ran a hand through his gray hair. "But now, after everything we found, I believe your sister wasn't hallucinating or losing her mind. Mary was trying to warn us about something real." The bloodhound Callie whined softly from her place by the door, her ears perked toward the forest beyond. The next morning, while exploring a hollow beneath an ancient oak tree, Jennifer discovered something wrapped in fabric, a faded blue scarf she immediately recognized as her sister's. Her heart raced as she carefully unwrapped it, revealing a second journal. Most entries documented ordinary days. Ethan learning to fish, Mary sketching the cabin at sunset, but the final page made Jennifer's blood run cold. The handwriting was jagged, pressed deep into the paper, as if written in desperate haste. If Ethan crosses the wrong path, he won't come back the same. I made the forest a deal. She kept it. Jennifer's hands shook as she showed the journal to Jonah Brown. The historian traced the words with his finger, his expression grave. What kind of deal could she have made? Jennifer whispered. In the old stories, Jonah replied, his voice heavy with the weight of his family's history. Those who bargain with the forest often trade parts of themselves. Memories, years, names, sometimes even their way home. Detective Smith stood at the window, watching Callie pace restlessly at the tree line. I think, he said slowly, Mary might have given up her return to save Ethan from something worse. Jennifer clutched the journal to her chest, her sister's last words burning into her heart. Whatever deal Mary had made with the forest, Jennifer was now determined to understand it, even if it meant making a bargain of her own. The first day of spring arrived with a gentle thaw, melting away the last stubborn patches of snow around Deadwater Lake. Jennifer Johnson stood at the edge of the clearing, her breath visible in the crisp morning air. For the first time in months, she felt a flicker of hope, the changing season bringing new possibilities for finding Mary and Ethan. Something's different today, Detective Robert Smith murmured, his weathered face scanning the tree line. The veteran officer had developed an almost preternatural sense for the forest's moods after months of searching. They returned at dawn the following day to an impossible sight. Where there had been only a carpet of decaying leaves and pine needles, a perfectly circular pool of water now gleamed in the morning light, still as glass and impossibly clear. But what made Jennifer's heart stop wasn't the water's sudden appearance. It was what reflected in its surface. Not the sky, not the towering pines, but faces. Mary and Ethan Johnson stared back at them from the other side of the water's surface. Mary's face showed the gentle weathering of time. New lines around her eyes, her hair slightly longer than in the photos from 2 years ago. Beside her, Ethan's face retained its childlike softness, though his eyes held something ancient and knowing. "Mary!" Jennifer cried out, dropping to her knees at the pool's edge. Tears streamed down her face as she reached toward her sister's reflection. "Ethan, can you hear me?" Her trembling fingers met only cold emptiness as they passed through the water's surface, creating no ripples, disturbing nothing. The faces remained, watching, seemingly just inches away, yet unreachable. Jonah Brown knelt beside her, his 67-year-old frame moving with deliberate care. The park historian studied the phenomenon with a mixture of awe and recognition. "This isn't water," he whispered, his voice barely audible above the rustling leaves. "It's a boundary, a mirrored passage to the other side." Jennifer looked at him questioningly, her eyes red-rimmed. "The Algonquin legends speak of places where the veil thins," Jonah continued, gesturing toward the pool. "Doorways that appear only to those the forest has chosen." Detective Smith crouched down, his skepticism finally crumbling as he stared into Mary's eyes across the impossible divide. "They look peaceful," he observed, his voice thick with emotion. Callie, the bloodhound, whined softly, pacing around the pool's perimeter, but never approaching its edge, as if sensing an invisible barrier. "Why can we see them now?" Jennifer asked, never taking her eyes off her sister and nephew. Jonah's weathered hand rested gently on her shoulder. "The thaw doesn't just melt ice," he said. "Sometimes it loosens the boundaries between worlds too." The truth settled over them like a shroud as they stood at the edge of the mirrored pool. Jennifer Johnson felt her knees weaken as the realization crystallized. Mary and Ethan hadn't vanished in the conventional sense. They had crossed a threshold into something beyond ordinary understanding. "They're in a fold," Jonah Brown whispered, his weathered fingers tracing symbols in his notebook. A pocket where time doesn't flow like it does here. The park historian's voice trembled with a mixture of academic fascination and personal dread. My mother spoke of these places before she disappeared. Detective Robert Smith paced along the water's edge, his reflection distorting with each step. So they've been living somewhere else all this time? The grizzled investigator's professional skepticism was crumbling beneath the weight of undeniable evidence. Not living exactly, Jonah explained. Existing, in a place where days might stretch into years or compress into moments. He gestured toward the water. The Algonquin called them forgotten spaces, places that time itself has overlooked. As if responding to their conversation, ripples disturbed the surface of the pool. Jennifer gasped as two faces appeared in the water, not reflections, but looking up from below. Mary's features had aged subtly, lines of worry etched around her eyes. Beside her was Ethan, his face exactly as it had been in the missing persons report, forever 7 years old. The boy pressed his small palm against the underside of the water's surface, creating a strange distortion where his hand should have broken through. His eyes pleaded silently, recognition flickering as he spotted his aunt. "Ethan," Jennifer whispered, reaching toward the water before Jonah gently pulled her hand back. "Don't touch it," he warned. "The boundary only opens on its terms." Callie the bloodhound whined softly, circling the pool's edge with uncharacteristic caution, as if sensing the unnatural divide. Detective Smith knelt beside the water, studying the impossible images with a policeman's scrutiny and a haunted man's understanding. Does the forest ever let them out? His voice was raw, stripped of professional detachment. Or are they trapped there forever? Jonah's expression darkened as he watched Ethan's hand press against the invisible barrier. The old stories say crossing back requires payment. You must leave something behind. He paused, his voice dropping. Perhaps your very name, your identity. Jennifer couldn't tear her eyes from her sister's face. Mary's expression held both warning and invitation, a complex message that transcended their separation. "He hasn't aged," Jennifer whispered, tears tracking down her cheeks. "All this time, and he's still 7. "Time doesn't work the same there," Jonah confirmed. "For them, it might have been days or centuries." The boundary between worlds rippled again, and for a moment, Jennifer could have sworn she heard her sister's voice carried on the wind. "We're waiting." Jennifer stood at the edge of the mirrored pool, clutching a worn piece of paper to her chest. The childhood map Mary had drawn for her decades ago, a fantastical creation she'd dismissed as mere imagination, now took on profound significance. With trembling fingers, she traced the faded lines that depicted secret paths through whimsical woods, places with names like Whisper Hollow and Forever Pine. "I think I understand now," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the strange stillness that had settled around them. "This wasn't just a game we played as children. Mary was trying to tell me something." Detective Smith moved beside her, his weathered face etched with concern. "What do you mean? These markings," Jennifer pointed to symbols on the childhood drawing that matched those on the more recent map they'd discovered. "They're the same. Mary knew about this place long before she came here with Ethan. This wasn't a random vacation spot. It was deliberate." Jonah Brown nodded slowly, his 67 years weighing heavily on his shoulders. "The forest chooses its visitors," the historian murmured, "sometimes generations before they arrive." The air around them thickened suddenly, becoming dense and difficult to breathe. Above their heads, the towering trees began to shift, their branches reaching toward one another like fingers interlocking. The natural canopy closed, blocking out the sky until only dappled shadows remained. "It's happening," Jonah whispered, his voice tinged with both fear and awe. The scent of burning cedar filled their nostrils, sharp, sweet, and ancient. Callie whined, pressing her body against Jennifer's legs, the bloodhound's instincts clearly sensing the shift in reality around them. "The other side is near," Robert said, using his smartphone to record the phenomenon, though the device flickered and distorted, unable to properly capture what was happening. Jennifer felt a peculiar warmth spread through her palm where she held the childhood map. The paper seemed to pulse with its own heartbeat. This wasn't just a map, she realized aloud. It was an invitation. Mary left this for me years ago, knowing someday I'd need it. The surface of the mirrored pool rippled without wind, reflecting not their faces but somewhere else, a place where light bent differently, where colors seemed both more vibrant and more muted. She knew I would come looking for her, Jennifer continued, a tear sliding down her cheek. She knew I wouldn't give up. The historian placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. The boundary is thinning. If you're going to try to reach them, it will be soon. The trees continued their unnatural movement, creating a cathedral-like arch above the pool. The scent of cedar intensified, and in the distance, they heard what sounded like a child's laughter. Ethan's laughter, carried on a wind that shouldn't exist. Jennifer took a deep breath and stepped closer to the edge of the water. "I'm coming," she whispered to the reflection that wasn't her own. "I'm coming to bring you home." Jennifer knelt by the mirrored pool, her fingers trembling as she lifted the piece of birch bark. The message scratched across it in bright blue crayon sent a chill down her spine. "I made the forest a deal. She kept it." The handwriting was unmistakably Mary's, the same careful lettering she'd used to mark Ethan's lunchboxes and school supplies. Detective Robert Smith crouched beside her, his weathered face reflecting in the still water. "That crayon brand was discontinued 5 years ago," he murmured, examining the vibrant blue marks. "Mary always kept a box for Ethan. He wouldn't use anything else." "It's as soft as if it was used yesterday," Jennifer whispered, running her thumb across the waxy surface. The crayon should have hardened after 2 years exposed to the elements, yet it remained fresh, vivid, as if time itself had bent around this small object. Jonah Brown approached slowly, his 67-year-old frame moving carefully over the uneven ground. The park historian's eyes widened as he studied the latest drawing they'd found tucked beneath the birch bark, a child's rendering of a woman with long dark hair and a crescent-shaped scar above her eyebrow. "This is impossible," he breathed, his voice barely audible above the whispering leaves. "This woman, she's my mother." Jennifer looked up sharply. "Your mother? The one who disappeared in these woods?" Jonah nodded, his fingers tracing the crude lines of the drawing. "Ethan couldn't have known what she looked like. She vanished decades before he was born." Callie, the bloodhound, whined softly and pressed her muzzle against Jonah's hand, as if offering comfort. The animal had been acting strangely all day, pacing in tight circles around the pool, refusing to drink from its mirror-clear surface. "The forest remembers," Jonah said, his voice steadying as he met Jennifer's gaze. "It holds on to things, people, memories, time itself, like knots in a tree's growth rings." Detective Smith pulled out his smartphone, scrolling through the case files. Every disappearance, every strange occurrence in these woods, they're all connected. He showed them a pattern of dates, stretching back generations. The forest doesn't just take, it collects. Jennifer carefully folded the drawing and placed it in her pocket, next to the photo of Mary and Ethan she'd carried since their disappearance. "What kind of deal would Mary make with a forest?" she asked, her voice breaking slightly. Jonah looked toward the twisted birches, their pale trunks gleaming in the fading light. "Perhaps the only kind a mother could make," he said softly. "A sacrifice." The wind picked up suddenly, rustling through the trees, with an almost musical quality, like distant voices calling names long forgotten. The forest's memory, tangled in roots and shadows, seemed to pulse around them, watching, waiting, remembering. Each discovery in the Adirondack forest had taken something from them all. Jennifer Johnson stood at the edge of the stone marker, watching as her once firm skepticism dissolved like morning mist. The rational woman who had arrived months ago seeking closure now found herself believing in folded realities and forest spirits that could steal names. Detective Robert Smith leaned against a weathered pine, his weathered face etched with concern. The case that had haunted his career was unraveling into something beyond police work. His hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his jacket, not from age, but from the resurgence of childhood terrors he'd spent decades burying. "I never told anyone," he confessed quietly, "but I used to dream about this place before I ever set foot here." Jonah Brown nodded solemnly, understanding the weight of such admissions. The park historian felt his family legacy pressing down on his shoulders with each new revelation. His mother's disappearance decades ago wasn't just a tragedy. It was a link in an ancient chain that somehow included him. "My grandfather used to say our blood remembers what our minds forget," the older man murmured, tracing the symbols on his notebook. "I never understood until now." Even Callie, the bloodhound who had first discovered Ethan's jacket, had transformed. The dog no longer behaved like a simple tracking animal. She moved with deliberate purpose, leading them to places that seemed random until mapped against Mary's drawings. Her eyes held an awareness that made even Jonah uneasy. The last patches of snow had finally surrendered to spring's warmth, revealing earth that seemed to breathe beneath their feet. Jennifer removed a small compass from her pocket, the same one she and Mary had used as children to explore the woods behind their childhood home. With reverent care, she placed the device on the stone marker her sister had sketched in her journal. The group fell silent as the compass needle began to spin, slowly at first, then with increasing speed until it became a blur of motion. It refused to settle, as if north itself had become a suggestion rather than a certainty. Above them, the wind that had whispered through the canopy suddenly died. The forest fell into an unnatural stillness. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, not even the sound of their own breathing seemed to penetrate the thick air. "The woods are waiting," Jonah whispered, his voice barely audible. Jennifer looked up at the arching trees, their branches creating cathedral-like patterns against the fading light. Something in the forest had recognized them. Something was listening. Something was deciding. Jennifer closed her eyes at the edge of the mirrored pool, surrendering to the profound silence that had descended upon the forest. Not a single leaf rustled, not a bird called. The world seemed to hold its breath in anticipation. After months of searching, following cryptic clues and battling her own skepticism, she finally understood what Mary had meant in her journal entries. "It's like the forest is listening," Detective Smith whispered, his weathered face tense with apprehension. The grizzled investigator who had carried Mary and Ethan's photo in his wallet for 2 years stood rigid. Sensing the change in the atmosphere, Jonah Brown placed a steadying hand on Jennifer's shoulder. The park historian's eyes reflected decades of family history intertwined with these woods. "The folds are opening," he murmured, recognition and fear mingling in his voice. Across the still water that shouldn't exist, this pool that reflected not the sky above, but another world entirely, a ripple formed. Jennifer gasped as Ethan's face appeared, older than 7 but somehow still childlike, his features both familiar and strange. "She says you can come now." His voice drifted across the boundary, faint but unmistakably clear. "But only if you leave your name behind." Jennifer instinctively touched the crescent-shaped scar on her wrist, a childhood injury from when she and Mary had built a fort in their backyard. As her fingers traced the familiar ridge, she felt it softening, smoothing, disappearing beneath her touch. The forest was already claiming pieces of her, erasing her history. "What's happening?" she whispered, showing her wrist to Jonah. The historian nodded solemnly. "The woods don't just take people. They take memories, identities. My mother understood this. So did Mary." Callie the bloodhound whined softly, pressing against Jennifer's leg. The animal that had first discovered Ethan's jacket now seemed to understand what was unfolding better than any human present. Detective Smith stepped forward. "Jennifer, you don't have to do this. We can find another way. But she knew there wasn't another way. The compass needle spinning wildly on the stone marker, Mary's voice memos describing time folding in on itself, the drawings showing the lady with no eyes, it all led to this moment of choice. The air thickened around her as reality thinned. Jennifer could see Mary now too, standing beside Ethan in that other place, her sister's face both older and timeless. She reached out her hand across the water's surface, and Jennifer felt an inexplicable pull. "I'm coming," Jennifer whispered, feeling the boundaries between worlds grow permeable around her. She took one last look at the world she knew, at Robert Smith's concerned face, at Jonah's knowing eyes, at faithful Callie, before turning back to the mirrored pool where her family waited. The forest remembered her now, and she was ready to step through. In the end, some doors are meant to open only once. Jennifer Johnson stood at the edge of the mirrored pool, her reflection rippling despite the stillness of the water. On the other side, beside her, Ethan, still 7 in essence but with eyes that had witnessed the forest's secrets, pressed his small palm against the invisible barrier separating them. Detective Robert Smith stood back, understanding at last that some mysteries weren't meant to be solved through evidence and logic. The grizzled investigator removed the faded photograph from his wallet, placing it carefully at the base of the oldest birch tree. A final surrender to the unexplainable. "The forest makes its own rules," Jonah Brown murmured, the park historian's voice heavy with the weight of generations who had faced this same choice. "It takes, but sometimes it gives back." Callie the bloodhound whined softly, her keen senses perceiving what human eyes could not. The thinning of boundaries, the folding of reality. The faithful animal pressed against Jennifer's leg one last time before backing away, as if understanding her role as guide was complete. Jennifer stepped forward, the water accepting her foot without a splash. The forest, satisfied with her choice, began closing the arches of branches overhead, sealing the pathway behind her. Ancient trees bent inward, their shadows deepening as they folded secrets back into their roots. As she crossed the threshold, Jennifer felt the strangest sensation, her name, her memories, her very identity becoming lighter, shedding like autumn leaves. The compass in her pocket spun wildly before growing still, finding a new north in this place where conventional directions held no meaning. The wind rose suddenly, sweeping through the clearing with unexpected force. It carried away the last traces of names and memory. Detective Smith's case notes scattered, Jonah's carefully preserved maps lifted skyward, and the crayon messages blurred until they became indistinguishable from the bark that held them. In the hush that followed, only Callie remained, watching the spot where 3 humans had been claimed by the Adirondack woods. The bloodhound turned away, padding back towards civilization with a purpose that suggested she understood more than any human ever could. And the forest remembered Jennifer too, choosing to let her in, or perhaps, finally, letting her go. For in this ancient place where names were taken and time folded like paper, the distinction between captivity and freedom had always been as fluid as the mirrored waters of Deadwater Lake.